Hello again everyone, this is Ken Martinez with Mark Investments with a new video in the series of the cash flow calculator analysis. This is brand new and it's a tab to help you analyze a defaulted list of first or seconds of pool. So let's get right to it. Like all the other tabs on the cash flow calculator, all the blue cells are input and everything else will be text and comments. There's quite a lot on here. I'm actually going to come back to this. I'm going to start over here on the right and we'll get back to this later in a second video because there's so much. Okay, the way this calculator or this tab is going to work is all the green are related to first, all the red or the salmon color is related to second lanes. And what I've done here is I've just started out with 4 categories that you might want to use to analyze a first and then 8 to analyze a second. I completely realize that there's probably 100 different ways to analyze a loan. The more ways you analyze, the more complicated, and this can get really complicated really quickly. So up to you on how complicated you really want to make it. This might even be too complicated, but anyhow, I'm using 4 and 8 for first and seconds. So let me explain what these rankings are. In order to really properly analyze a pool of loans, you're going to need a scoring system. So I've just used a basic 1 to 5. 1 is the worst to 5 being the best. And I've given you these categories, and let me explain what they are. So the first thing when we're talking about first is how much equity in the property. And I've given you this little table here, and the way this is if you bought a first loan and you had anywhere from say $0 to $10,000 of equity, you'd get a point of 1. And the next level would be if you had anywhere from at least 10,000, anywhere between 10 and 20,000, you get a score of 2, all the way down to, if you had like 40,000 or more, you'd get a perfect score of 5 on my ranking system. Again, everything is from 1 to 5, or 1 worst, 5 best, higher score, better. So the more equity, obviously, when you buy a first loan, the better. But if you want to change it, you're more than welcome to change it or leave what I have here now. But that's how these categories are going to work. They're going to get a point system from 1 to 5. The next category on first is going to be the percent, because I mean there's 2 parts really. The 2 main parts is how cheap can you buy that loan, and then how much equity in terms of a hard dollar is protecting you. So on the percent, the lower obviously you can buy a loan, the better. So if you can buy it anywhere less than 25%, 0 to 25, you get a score of 5. When you hit the 25% mark, 25 to 50, you get a score of 4, and obviously the more you pay, the worse it is. So that's how these buckets work on these ranking systems. And so let me cover the next 2 for first lanes. And next one is the cash on cash return. If all else fails, this is your worst case scenario. You weren't able to work it out, and not only that, but you had to foreclose, and not only that, but you couldn't even sell it. You actually had to rent it out. I'll give you the formula a little bit later. But what would be your cash on cash return if you had to foreclose and then rent? So same thing again, obviously the more money you make, the higher the score, 5%, you get a score of 2, and so on. And that's this one. And next thing for first is how many months does it take to foreclose? I mean, some of this is going to depend on the value of the note, depends on the value or where the house is located, what state. So generally for first, the longer it takes you to foreclose, it would be probably a bad thing, I think, if you're buying first. So I've given you the scores. The sooner you can foreclose if you needed to, then the more points you're going to get. And you can see, and I have my scale from 1 to 13 months. Anyhow, so that's it for first lanes. I've just given you 4 buckets. Again, you could have probably 50 buckets, but it would get really complicated, and these are your basic ones. Sort of the state you're buying in, and price, equity amount, and then sort of a worst case scenario on here. For second lanes, the red areas, I've given you 8 different areas, and Same thing applies on the first. If you want to add more or less, completely up to you, but you can use this tab to add or subtract according to your own needs or what you consider important. But at least you have a nice template here. You have a format to use. And you know, you could do 1 to 10, but I think that ends up being more complicated. Probably 1 to 5 is perfect for what we need. So anyhow, second loans, the main thing, one of the main things is what's the status of the first. Obviously, if it's current, that'd be the best thing. So they get a point, they get 5 points all the way down to if the first is in foreclosure or it's not performing at all, they're late, down to 1 point. So the status of the first, how much equity, similar to the first, is obviously the more equity you have, the better. The numbers are smaller because it's harder to buy second liens with equity protecting you. So any equity at all is a good thing. The more the better. And you know, I actually have negative here because we can and do buy second loans with negative equity with nothing protecting us. But so that's that. How much equity does the owner have? Maybe they have some, maybe they have none, but this would be the value of the first and second liens divided by the value of the house. So the more equity they have, that would be a value to a second lien buyer. So you get more points. And if they have no equity or they're underwater, they get just 1 point. So that's this category. And next one would be how many payments have they had in the last year? If most of these, probably they're going to have 0 payments, so they get 1 point. But if they had, you know, if you're buying a mixed pool of performing and non-performing, then your performer, you're going to get more points, and anything in between would get a score of 2, 3, or 4. So a number of payments in the last 12 months. Second lien, how big is the second lien? You certainly don't want to get too small. It's just not going to be worth your time. And same thing on the other end. You probably don't want to buy a $200,000 UPB. I think there's probably a sweet spot for most of us around this mark, so they get the highest. But like everything else, this is really completely up to you on what you want to value. So change these values here, but I would keep, for the purpose of this, I would keep everything on a scale of 1 to 5. I think that's a good enough scale, and then you just change the value if you want to change according to how you buy. Anyhow, so emotional equity. This is how long has the homeowner been in the home. I just sort of made these values up. Obviously, the longer they've been in the home, you'll have some probably more emotional equity. So I would think you give more value to the number of years, and 0 means that they're not in the home now. The home is vacant, and that's probably not what we want. You probably don't want a vacant on the first one either, but so they get only 1 point if it's vacant or they haven't been there. The more credit, the credit worthy the borrower, the higher their FICO credit score, the more points they would get. So I've just put these scores in, and so anything over 650 obviously would be a good thing from a borrower point of view, and they would get the most points. Last thing is for seconds is how much bigger is the first divided by the second. So I think you probably don't want to buy a second where the first is over 4 times the size of the second. So if the first is $1 million and you're buying a $20,000 loan, you know, that's going to present all sorts of problems with a large payment. Especially if they can't make that. If you need to foreclose, you need to rent it out. So you probably, I think for a second, you want the as close as possible in size to the first as close to the second there. So, but you know, choose whatever value makes most sense to you. And then the last thing I have over here is how much. What is your estimate of foreclosure cost? And I've usually just put a blanket amount of $5,000 plus an extra $1,000 for servicing. That is going to cost you to board and service, and if they have to do a loan mod and all that. So just put. You need to account for some factor if you do need to foreclose, because obviously there's an expense there. And then the last thing I'll go over to in the next video is sites to get a value of their house. There's these are the most common ones I think investors use, and then if you need to figure out what the rent meters are a good one. But these I use these here, and they seem to be pretty good for free websites. That's it for now, and look for the second video where we'll go over the rest of the spreadsheet.